Today, we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating, complex, and, let's be honest, controversial plants on the entire planet.
And hey, a huge shout out to marijuana.school for sponsoring this explainer. It's because of them that we can make this kind of in-depth education happen. You know, that sounds like the setup to a really weird joke, right? But believe it or not, there's a single thread, one single plant, that connects all of these completely different groups across thousands of years.
Yep, cannabis. We're talking about a story that starts with Chinese Emperor Shen Nung jotting down its medicinal uses literally thousands of years ago, then jumps to the 16th century when navies needed so much hemp for their ropes and sails that kings actually mandated people to grow it. And it brings us all the way to today, with scientists mapping out exactly what it does to our brains. What a history.
Okay, first things first. We have to tackle the biggest, most common belief in the world of cannabis, this idea that everything fits neatly into one of two little boxes.
Come on, you've heard this a million times. It's Cannabis 101, right? Sativa is for an energetic, get-things-done kind of feeling. Indica is what puts you in a couch, all relaxed and sleepy. It's super simple, it's catchy, but is it actually true?
Now, this classic view wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was actually based on how the plants looked. Sativas, which grew near the equator, got tall and skinny with these thin little leaves. Indicas, from the tough mountains of the Hindu Kush, were short, bushy, and had these broad leaves to survive the cold. The idea was that the effects just sort of followed the plant shape.
But here's the thing. Decades and decades of crossbreeding have pretty much erased those pure original plant lines. For years, growers have been mixing and matching, trying to get, say, the big harvest of a sativa with the quick growing time of an indica. And the result? Pretty much everything you find today is a hybrid. Finding a pure anything is almost impossible. And this really gets to what scientists are all saying now. Those labels, indica, sativa, they're not really telling you about the plant's genetics anymore. They're basically a marketing shortcut. They're telling you what the grower hopes you'll feel, not what the plant's DNA actually is.
So if sativa and indica aren't the real story, then what is? Well, to figure that out, we need to stop looking at the shape of the plant and start looking at the amazing chemical cocktail that's going on inside it.
Okay, before cannabis can do anything to you, it needs something to connect with. And it turns out, our bodies are literally built for this. We have something called the endocannabinoid system. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Your body has millions of tiny little locks, called receptors. The chemicals in cannabis are like the keys, and they are perfectly shaped to fit into those locks, turning them and causing an effect.
And in that giant bundle of chemical keys, there are two master keys that you've definitely heard of. First, you've got THC. That's the famous one. It's the key that fits into the locks in our brain and gives you that psychoactive high. Then you have its cousin, CBD. It's non-intoxicating, so no high, but it's really well known for its potential to help with things like anxiety and inflammation.
But here's where it gets really cool. It's not just about THC and CBD. The plant makes hundreds of different compounds. Some of these are called terpenes. They're the aromatic oils that give things their smell, like lemons or pine trees. The entourage effect is this theory that all of these compounds work together. It's not one key in one lock. It's more like a whole orchestra, with THC as the lead violin, CBD as the cello, and all the terpenes as the other instruments, all playing together to create one unique piece of music. That's the effect.
So that chemical profile is one huge part of the puzzle. But there's another piece that's just as important. The way you feel is dramatically different depending on how you actually consume it.
And I mean, just look at how stark these differences are. If you smoke or vape, those compounds go straight from your lungs into your bloodstream. Bam! You feel it in minutes. But it also fades pretty quickly. Now compare that to an edible. It could take you 2 hours to feel a thing. But when you do, that feeling can stick around for half a day, sometimes even longer. And this leads to a super common question, especially for anyone who's had we'll call it a memorable experience with a brownie. It is not just in your head. Edibles really do create a totally different and often much stronger experience. So why is that?
Well, the secret is your liver. See, when you eat cannabis, that regular old THC takes a trip through your digestive system and eventually ends up in your liver. And your liver is like a little chemical factory. It metabolizes that THC and transforms it into a brand new compound called 11-hydroxy-THC. And this new molecule? It's a beast. It's way more potent, and it can cross into your brain much more easily, which is why the effect feels so much more intense.
All right, so we've got the science down.
But to truly understand this plant, you have to know about its absolute roller coaster of a relationship with human society. Let's rewind the clock.
For thousands of years, cannabis was just normal. It was a medicine, a spiritual tool, a crucial industrial crop for making stuff like rope and sails. I mean, it was a common ingredient in Western drugstores in the 1800s. But in the 20th century, everything flipped. It started getting criminalized in 1937, and then in 1970, the hammer came down. It was made a Schedule I drug, putting it in the same category as heroin and calling it a substance with no accepted medical use.
And that change wasn't an accident. The whole campaign, led by people like Harry Anslinger, intentionally stopped using the scientific name cannabis. Instead, they started pushing the foreign-sounding word marijuana. And this was a calculated move. They wanted to tie the plant to Mexican immigrants and stir up a public panic that was really rooted in racism and fear. It was a rebranding that was devastatingly effective for almost a century.
Which brings us to right now. We are living through another massive cultural shift with this plant. It's a brand new era, and it's defined by this wild mix of medical promise, serious public health concerns, and just a staggering amount of profit.
Look, as cannabis gets more legal and way more potent, we have to be really clear-eyed about the risks. Research suggests around 30% of people who use it might develop some form of cannabis use disorder. For teenagers, whose brains are still wiring themselves up, heavy use is linked to cognitive issues. For people who are already genetically predisposed, high-potency stuff is linked to a higher risk of psychosis. And of course, just like alcohol, driving impaired is a huge, huge public safety issue. All of this has created this fascinatingly messy patchwork of laws across the globe. You've got countries like Canada and Uruguay that just went all in, fully legal. Then you have places like the US or Germany that are tiptoeing in with medical programs or state-by-state rules. And then you have a place like Thailand, which went legal and then slammed on the brakes and started recriminalizing it, which just goes to show you this is not a one-way street.
And underneath all the science and all the laws and all the history, there is an absolute tidal wave of money. This isn't some niche underground market anymore. The legal cannabis industry is a global financial powerhouse, and it's on track to be worth almost $60 billion in just a few years.
So in the end, you have this one plant that we've defined as a medicine, as a dangerous menace, and now as a multi-billion-dollar industry. As the science finally starts to push the old stigma out of the way, the big question we're all left with is, what's next? How are we going to choose to define our relationship with this plant in the future? And that's a question we're all going to be answering together.